not going to change the fact that Trump's allies have a plan that if all else fails, to eliminate medication abortion.
When they look at all of the problems that we have, they're using us as a bad example of democracy.
A lasting peace for Ukraine must be underwritten by Ukraine's own ability to defend itself now and to deter future aggression anytime in the future.
Hello, everyone. I'm Weijia Jiang in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. The president is meeting with world leaders at the G7 summit in Italy as he lays out new support for Ukraine in its fight against Russia. Plus, Donald Trump heads back to Capitol Hill for the first time since January 6th. His rallying call to Republicans as they work to show a united front ahead of the November elections. But first, the Supreme Court makes a ruling in the first case on abortion restrictions since Roe v. Wade was overturned almost 2 years ago. The High Court preserves access to the nation's most prescribed abortion drug, mifepristone.
I understand it was a procedural decision, but going to the substance, this drug has been sold in America safely and effectively for decades.
Based on the questions that they asked on that day, that doesn't surprise me.
They got one right. It's tremendous. It's a great relief. Let's hope it continues.
Jan Crawford and Elizabeth Sepper join us now. Jan is CBS News' chief legal correspondent, and Elizabeth is a professor of law at the University of Texas, Austin. Thank you both for being here. So, Jan, this case was not about the FDA's approval of the drug. It was not about how accessible it should be. It was about whether the plaintiffs had a seat at the table at all. Can you help us understand that?
Yeah, I mean, it's as Senator Durbin kind of said, it's a procedural, jurisdictional threshold issue that if you want to sue somebody, you've got to show that you've actually been harmed, that you have imminent harm, actual harm. You can't just say, like, I don't like this policy, so I'm going to run to court and I'm going to sue. You've got to show that you have standing. That's what that means, legal standing, the ability to go into court and file a lawsuit to have those harms addressed. And the court today unanimously, 9-0, written by Justice Kavanaugh, said this group of anti-abortion doctors did not have that standing. They could not show they had been harmed by the FDA's approval of mifepristone. They didn't have to prescribe mifepristone. They didn't have to treat women who may have been one of those rare patients who suffered some harm as a result of it. So they just had no injury and no business filing this lawsuit in the first place. So that's how they resolved the case. They basically reversed 4 conservative lower federal court judges who had found that there was standing, and then went on to the bigger question that you just pointed out about how, the FDA, the lower court had said the FDA really did a flawed process when it approved mifepristone. So the court didn't have to get to the merits. They just said at the outset this group had no business being in court.
And as you mentioned, this was a unanimous decision. How significant is that for a case that's pretty controversial?
Right. I mean, you think of the abortion issue obviously is divisive, and this certainly has divided this court like it's divided the country. But this ended up being a very straightforward issue, a jurisdictional issue that they all came together on. And I think to see unanimity on a case where abortion is an underlying issue, it really is interesting, but not surprising. The arguments, I thought, were clear that the justices did not believe this group belonged in court suing the FDA. And they also are unanimous more than people realize. We focus on the controversial cases that divide the court, because those are some of the bigger ones. But, last year, about half the time they were unanimous, or there'll be a different lineup of justices, not always liberal and conservative.
And Elizabeth, in the opinion, Justice Kavanaugh wrote, quote, "The plaintiffs have sincere legal, moral, ideological, and policy objections to elective abortion and to FDA's relaxed regulation of mifepristone. But those kinds of objections alone do not establish a justiciable case or controversy in federal court." So I wonder, are there plaintiffs in other cases that do fit those guidelines?
Yeah, so it is possible that this case is not truly over. Idaho, Missouri, and Kansas all intervened in Judge Kaczmarek's court in Amarillo in this case. And from the Supreme Court, it will go back to Judge Kaczmarek. Now, he might dismiss their complaint, but we may see states try to sue and challenge the FDA's regulation of mifepristone and maybe even the approval of mifepristone dating back to 2000. I think there are warning signs in this opinion. A lot of the state standing argument is based on some of the same arguments we saw from these physicians. Things like it makes insurance premiums go up, or we have all sorts of conjectural arguments about harms that might be caused to people from taking medication abortion. So these may be unsuccessful, but it's fairly plausible that we will see new complaints filed from different parties, in this case, probably some conservative states.
And Elizabeth, I know a lot of women at home are probably wondering, well, what does this mean for me? Can you help explain, that it doesn't mean everything's a go and that all the hurdles are gone for getting this drug?
Right. It means that mifepristone, the drug used in a 2-pill regimen and now used in about 63% of abortions, is available across the United States, but it is not legally available in abortion-banned states. So it is clear that people in abortion-banned states are receiving mifepristone via the mail. They're ordering it on the internet. They're going to telehealth through other states or countries. And mifepristone will be on the market. It will remain approved for those who live in states without abortion restrictions. There won't be any change in access to abortion.
And Jan, Elizabeth alluded to this, but there are other cases coming up that deal with abortion. Can you talk about what those are about?
Right, and there's one big one we're waiting on from Idaho. The Biden administration is arguing that Idaho's strict almost near ban on abortion is at odds with a federal law that requires hospitals to get certain federal funding to provide emergency treatment for patients who need stabilizing treatment. And they're saying that that's at odds with Idaho's ban because doctors may feel like their hands are tied and they can't treat women who would come in and may need an emergency abortion, to protect their health. So that's a really was a very emotional argument because it raises pretty difficult questions about women's health and when states can ban abortion if, their life's not on the line, but their health could be in danger. I expect we'll get that decision probably at the end of the term. I think that's going to be a pretty hard case for them.
That decision and so many others in the next few weeks. Thank you so much, Jan Crawford and Elizabeth Supper.
President Biden's been very clear. American-made steel produced by union workers is the backbone of our economy.
Touting the president's record on infrastructure while courting the union vote, Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg joins us next on America Decides. The Biden administration is touting progress made through the 2021 bipartisan infrastructure law as Election Day draws closer. The Department of Transportation this week released a video promoting the Build America, Buy America Act enacted under the law. It requires all federally funded infrastructure projects to be built with American-made materials. According to the White House, more than 50,000 projects are currently underway. Joining us now, U.S. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg. Secretary, thanks so much for being here with us.
Good to be with you.
I want to talk about your department's focus on the Build America, Buy America Act, but I have to start with today's big news out of the Supreme Court. What is your reaction to the unanimous ruling that preserves access to mifepristone for so many women across this country?
Well, I know there's a measure of relief about the ruling. Unfortunately, it doesn't change the bigger picture that the right to access to abortion in this country under Roe versus Wade is over, was ended by the Trump administration and the court that it created. And that withdrawal of rights and freedoms from millions of women across America continues to create these vulnerabilities where there are questions over the availability of medication, the availability of birth control, and we're seeing continued conservative efforts to attack IVF as well. We're really living in a new era, and it's one of the reasons our administration is committed to making sure that women's health care, women's rights, and women's access to abortion continues to have as much support as possible under the law.
And turning back to the Build America, Buy America Act, Obviously, you have been talking about different parts of the infrastructure law. Why is your department now focusing on this particular piece of it?
Well, we want to draw attention to another benefit of all of these infrastructure projects that sometimes isn't as well publicized. Obviously, when we build a bridge, when we expand an airport, when we deepen a port, the completion of that project marks a benefit for everybody who is going to use it or count on it. But even while we're still building it, while that construction is going on, and all across America we're seeing a lot of construction going on right now, that's creating a benefit too because of the good paying jobs that it creates. President Biden's focus on the Buy America concept and the law behind it, being the Build America, Buy America Act, makes sure that American taxpayer dollars go to American products, that everything from the services that go into a construction effort to the steel is made in America. One of the things that I was able to do just a few days ago that was so moving was to go to Steelton to spend time in this Pennsylvania community with the workers who literally make the railroads that America's rails run on. They can take one look at a rail and just by eyeballing it, tell you whether it's going to the metro system in DC or an Amtrak line in the West. And it's just absolutely extraordinary to see what they achieve. By the way, U.S. steel also much cleaner than Chinese steel, for example, in terms of the emissions, the pollutions that it creates, much better, cleaner techniques here. So we just want to make sure we're focusing on the men and women who are actually, literally, doing the building that the Biden infrastructure package is funding with 50,000 projects and counting all across the country.
I'm so glad you brought up that conversation in Pennsylvania. A lot of those men and women were union members in Pennsylvania. A recent CBS News poll shows that while the president is leading Trump among union households in Michigan, they are tied in the Keystone State. And I wonder why you think that is, and if you're doing anything in particular to reach out to those voters.
Well, I can't talk about the campaign while I'm in this capacity, but I will say this. President Biden is proud of this administration being the most pro-union administration in modern American history, including making history by being the first sitting president to go out to a picket line when he stood with the UAW workers in their quest for the historic contract that they won. Look, there's been a very clear difference in policy between our administration and the more anti-union policies that took place during the Trump administration. We believe this is the right thing to do because we know that unions have created the kind of income and job security that built the American middle class. And we're going to keep doubling down on that in all of the work that we're doing across the country, especially when it comes to things that I have the privilege of working on, like the construction of bridges and airports and railroads and everything else that we're funding through this historic infrastructure package.
And before I let you go, Secretary, today the chair of the House Administration Committee, Brian Steele, he sent subpoenas to 15 members of the Biden cabinet, including you, related to the executive order on promoting access to voting, which of course was from 2021. And he wrote in this letter that he's concerned and that Congress's delegation of authority to the Department of Transportation does not include using funds and resources to provide Americans with voter registration materials. Your response, Secretary?
Heard about this, saw the media coverage of this, and we'll review it, try to get an understanding of what it is they're talking about. And look, we always engage with Congress whenever they reach out with an oversight question or concern. I'm sure that process will play out here as well, and we're happy to answer any legitimate questions or concerns about the work that we're doing in the Department of Transportation and across the administration.
Just quickly, has your department used any funds and resources to provide Americans with?
We still need to review this material that's come in and get a sense of what the concern might be. But we're happy to answer any legitimate concern, and we'll look into it.
So you do intend to comply with the subpoena?
Again, we just got it, so
Okay.
we'll figure out exactly what they're asking, and we'll respond appropriately.
Understood. Secretary Pete Buttigieg, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
New aid for Ukraine tops the early agenda as President Biden meets with G7 leaders in Italy. We are following the president's trip. You're streaming America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. President Biden and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky have signed a long-term security agreement. The two leaders held a joint press conference earlier today at the G7 summit in Italy. Our Nancy Cordes has the latest from there.
Good evening. President Biden stood on the stage behind me a short time ago, and alongside the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, the two men signed a historic agreement. This would essentially commit the U.S. to supporting Ukraine for the next 10 years with military assistance, military training, intelligence sharing, all designed to send a message to Vladimir Putin in Russia that the U.S. is not going anywhere, that he can't simply wait America out, as President Biden said. That was just one of several major developments on the Ukraine front here in Italy today at the G7 summit. The G7 leaders, including President Biden, came to an agreement to provide a $50 billion loan to Ukraine using the interest from hundreds of billions of dollars worth of Russian assets that have been frozen around the world since shortly after this invasion began 2.5 years ago. That is money that Ukraine will be able to use starting as early as this year to rebuild its shattered infrastructure, build power plants, and to build up its own capacity to produce weaponry so it doesn't have to rely quite as much on the U.S. and on other nations around the world. President Biden, in the press conference that followed that signing, was asked about his son's conviction on felony gun charges earlier this week. It's the first time that President Biden has spoken publicly about that verdict. He said that he will abide by the verdict and that he is not going to pardon his son. He was asked if he would consider commuting his son's sentence when that sentence is handed down a few months from now, and he paused and then responded, no.
Nancy Cordes, thank you. CBS News' chief Washington correspondent, Major Garrett, joins us now. Major, great to see you.
Great to see you, Weege.
So, as you know, President Biden and former President Donald Trump, they have very different worldviews and therefore very different foreign policies. When these leaders sign agreements, communiques, those are not the law of the land.
No.
If President Biden President Trump were to take office, it's a big if, of course, no one knows.
No one knows.
Can you tell us about how all of this could be undone, how foreign policy could be changed in a second?
This is what is called an executive agreement. It's an agreement between the Biden administration and the government led by Volodymyr Zelensky in Ukraine. It is essentially two world leaders shaking hands and talking about assurances to one another. If the American presidency is held by former President Trump starting in January of next year, he would have every right, as would any other president, to review this and reject it. And to say, no, that was my predecessor's policy. It is not mine. Might negotiate under different terms or might abolish it entirely. It is a question that looms over this particular agreement because there is tremendous anxiety, not shared by the Biden re-election campaign, but there's tremendous anxiety in Europe that former President Trump is the odds-on favorite to win this. The Economist magazine basically said this week the odds are 2-1 that former President Trump will win the 2024 election. So everyone in Europe is wondering, what is the stability of the Biden presidency, and do these agreements last past effectively November of this year? That's one of the reasons the Biden administration worked so hard to hammer this out, get this thing specified, to try to give it some aspect of solidity. So if former President Trump wins and wants to redo it, he would have a lot farther to go than if there was no policy or no agreement at all.
And of course, something else that is not binding is President Biden's words in an interview at a press conference with regard to what he has said about his son, Hunter.
Sure.
And the other big news today was that for the first time, he said he would not commute Hunter Biden's sentence. Can you talk about why that is important for him to say right now, to make clear, especially given the fact that his opponent was just convicted as well?
So the president wants to draw a very sharp contrast between himself and former President Trump about the rule of law, Does it apply to everyone, even those closest to the president? And if it does, will you respect it? President Biden has now been given several opportunities and has taken every one of them, though hesitantly. He's not eager to wade in on this. You know even better than I do, Weed, how deeply affected this is to him personally. It's a tragedy. It's an internal tragedy for the president to know his son Hunter could go to prison and could go to prison for some extended period of time. But he's not going to pardon him. And importantly, a shouted question from that great press corps traveling with the president, always asking whenever you can, whatever access you have, will you commute? No. That's more information than we had 3 hours ago about what his intentions were to in any way soften the blow, legally speaking, that may be coming to Hunter Biden. That's on the record, and it's now a point of contrast for the president, reluctant though he may be, to acknowledge that he has.
Major Garrett, thank you so much as always.
President Trump brought an extraordinary amount of energy and excitement and enthusiasm this morning. That is what we're seeing in the party throughout the country.
Former President Donald Trump returns to Capitol Hill for the first time since the January 6th riots. Coming up, his message to Senate Republicans and how it could shape the 2024 elections. You're streaming America Decides.
And if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore. My fellow Americans, for our movement, for our children, and for our beloved country, and I say this despite all that's happened, the best is yet to come.
That was Donald Trump on January 6th, 2021, addressing supporters shortly before some of them stormed the Capitol. Today, he returned to Capitol Hill, but as the presumptive Republican nominee, where he met with GOP House and Senate leaders. Our Nicole Killian joins us now from Capitol Hill. Nicole, what did he have to say today?
Well, look, Ouija, this was really about trying to rally Republican support both in the House and in the Senate ahead of the November election. Much of the discussion was really centered on coming to agreement on policy, whether that be securing the border, energy policy, the economy. So those were some of the topics up for discussion that the president raised both with House and Senate Republicans, in addition to fielding questions from members. There were times where he did talk about the cases and investigations against him, talking about how the Justice Department, in his view, has been weaponized. According to some sources, he even went so far as to refer to the DOJ as dirty, no-good bastards, although some lawmakers told us they did not necessarily hear him say those comments, but rather he talked more broadly about the weaponization of the Justice Department and this two-tiered system that they feel exists. But that being said, you know, the mood was largely upbeat, according to many members that I talked to. Also, a lot of it was just about, trying to galvanize members and the president expressing support for many incumbents and Republicans down ballot, saying that he will help them, whether that's through tele-town halls and other means to try to win a Republican majority both in the House and the Senate this year.
And Nicole, you also spoke with Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene about this visit. I imagine she was quite happy to see the former president, since she is one of his most loyal supporters.
Yeah, well, I was going to say more broadly speaking, again, this was about rallying support, but also about mending fences. And so, whether you look at the meeting with House Republicans and Marjorie Taylor Greene, or you look at this meeting with Senate Republicans and the president, shaking hands with Mitch McConnell for the first time in years, this was about trying to bring Republicans together. Marjorie Taylor Greene, as you know, was just behind a recent effort to try to oust Speaker Johnson, and the president did chide her about that during the meeting today. Take a listen.
Did you ask if you were being nice?
President Trump saw me. I don't know how he saw me because I was sitting a ways back, and he said, "Hello, Marjorie," and he joked and he said, "Are you being nice to Speaker Johnson?" And I said, and he goes, "Okay, you be nice to him." And then he also said, "She's loyal to me. She shows up wherever I go. She supports me." And he told everyone in the room that I'm very capable, and I always appreciate President Trump.
So again, that was her takeaway there. Obviously, more a moment of levity in that meeting. But I also asked her if January 6th came up simply because this is the former president's first time visiting Capitol Hill publicly since the insurrection. He did not bring that up in the House meeting or the Senate meeting, but certainly the timing is notable.
And Nicole, you've been so busy today, as you are every day. You also spoke with former Speaker Newt Gingrich about Trump. What did he say?
Yeah, that's right. Well, keep in mind, the former speaker was here on Capitol Hill just yesterday as Speaker Mike Johnson presented this 100-day agenda to Republicans, again, trying to lay the groundwork in the event the former president is elected. But in terms of the former speaker being here at this meeting with Trump, I asked him more specifically about former Speaker Paul Ryan's comments about Donald Trump, because just recently in an interview, Ryan said that he believes that Trump is unfit to serve in office. And so I asked the former speaker his take on that comment.
Former Speaker Paul Ryan says the former president is unfit to serve. What do you think?
I think I'd be curious if Ryan's going to vote for Biden, who is incapable of serving. We live in a world of finite choices. And I think Trump's a vastly better choice and a vastly safer choice than Biden. But I'd be curious if you get a chance to go ask Paul. Is he going to vote for Biden?
Even if the former president is convicted?
Oh, that's a fake conviction. That trial was an absurdity.
So obviously you heard the former speaker there trying to dismiss a trial of a jury of the former president's peers. But that being said, a conviction is a conviction, and we know the former president will be sentenced in a matter of weeks. But look, that was broadly kind of the sentiment that many Republicans had, really trying to not focus on these charges that the former president is facing and really trying to focus on the path ahead to the November election. Legia.
Nicole Killian, thank you, as always. Let's bring in our political panel, Kadia Goba and Daniela Diaz. Kadia is a political reporter for Semafor, and Daniela is a congressional reporter for Political. Thank you both. It's great to see you. Let's pick up where Nicole left off. I actually want to play a soundbite, I should say, from the former House Speaker, Paul Ryan.
I hate the fact that I feel like I got to write in a Republican like I did the last time in 2020. I voted for him in 2016, hoping that there was going to be a different kind of person in office. And I do think character is a really important issue. If you put yourself above the Constitution, as he has done.
This is probably easy for Ryan to say because he's not an elected official anymore. And I wonder, do his words matter? Do they carry weight? Does he represent a group of Republicans who are still in Congress?
I'm sure he does represent a group of Republicans who aren't in Congress, but I think you hit it on the spot. He doesn't have anything to lose, just like Romney, who's not running for re-election, and other people who have said they wouldn't vote for Trump. I think what we should be paying attention to are some of the lawmakers in those vulnerable 16, 17 lawmakers in those Biden seats who actually haven't said anything, because there are still a bunch of them who haven't come out in favor of President Trump or former President Trump.
I think what's most interesting about all of this is it really shows how much the Republican Party has changed in the last 8 years. He was the former speaker. He was the leader of the Republican conference. And now we're seeing him say, Donald Trump is unfit. I've moved on. Other people should too. Of course, the majority of the conference, as we saw today on both sides, still very much support the former president. He was welcomed jovially, as we saw just hours ago. Yes. But it is really telling when, a former leader is saying this about the former president.
And what do you make of just the entire episode that we saw? You alluded to the joyful nature. They sang happy birthday to him. They gave him gifts. I mean, clearly, if there is, if there are different factions, we didn't really see that today.
Yeah, this has been consistent, right? And a path for the past 8 years, how Republicans have been gradually going down this path. There's no doubt he is the leader of the party. They understand the base, that he controls the base. And I think, more importantly, Congress was a mess this season, right? Mm-hmm. So they're leaning on him because, again, he does control the base, and he's actually throughout convictions, even probably more of a shining light for them than their own colleagues in Congress.
And it was really interesting, too. He got the endorsement of Speaker Mike Johnson today, which is crucial, of course, as Speaker Mike Johnson wants to continue to lead the party after November. He was, Marjorie Taylor Greene, someone we just discussed, was trying to boot Johnson as a speaker. And so it shows the power he has and continues to have on Capitol Hill, and why it was so important for him to visit with Republicans today and have that kind of relationship where he got birthday cake from Senate Republicans, which was incredibly interesting. It looked delicious.
And it's not even his birthday.
It's not even his birthday, but it is really telling that that's how he was received. And there were skeptics in the room. I mean, Mitt Romney went to go meet in the Senate Republican Conference, this meeting at the NRSC with him. Todd Young. These are members that won't endorse him, and they were still in the room. It's really, really telling.
And he had a reunion with Mitch McConnell. I want to remind viewers of something that Mitch McConnell said, where he was back in January 6th of 2021. Let's listen.
There's no question, none, that President Trump is practically and morally responsible for provoking the events of the day. No question about it. The people who stormed this building believed they were acting on the wishes and instructions of their president.
Okay, guys, that wasn't that long ago. And today we saw McConnell with a very warm handshake with, Trump. And he's not alone, as you already talked about. Many Republicans have jumped back on the bandwagon. Why?
He is the leader of the party. There is no denying.
It's so striking.
And I mean, they look at him as someone that's going to direct them and possibly win them other elections, or if they want to participate in anything when it comes to Republicans. They know that they need that endorsement. What I thought was interesting is that I heard members say that he talked about, coalescing around even members who voted against or voted to impeach him, but yet he has endorsed their opponents. So I'm not sure how that's going to play out. But Republicans need a trifecta if they're going to try to push forward any of this policy. So I imagine that was behind that.
I do think it's really important to note, Ija, that they hadn't spoken since 2020. This was the first time that they'd spoken with each other since even before, what happened on January 6th. So the fact that we saw McConnell embrace Trump is incredibly telling. He's not going to be leader after November. He's already said he's not going to do that. But it is a sign that he plans to support the president going into November and in an effort to beat Joe Biden.
Given that context to an outsider, it seems like it should have been an awkward moment, but their love of each other was on full display. Thank you so much, Kadia and Daniela. Great to see you.
This is an outstanding group of people. I'm with them 1,000%. They're with me 1,000%.
Promoting party unity. As former President Trump rallies the troops on Capitol Hill, we've got more on what he had to say to Republican lawmakers. You're streaming America Decides. Shortly after meeting with Senate and House Republicans on Capitol Hill today, former President Donald Trump outlined some of the policy goals that he and the lawmakers are united behind.
We want to see borders. We want to see strong military. We want to see money not wasted all over the world. We don't want to see Russian ships right off the coast of Florida, which is what they are right now. That's unthinkable. We want to see just success for our country, and we don't have success right now.
Robert Costa joins me now. Robert, thank you for being here. Earlier today, you sat down with the Senate Republican Conference chair, and I want to play some of that and have you talk about it on the other side.
Was there any tension between Leader McConnell and former President Trump?
No, a couple of times during this meeting, President Trump referred to Senator McConnell in a positive way.
Really? What did he
they were
say?
sitting very close to each other, talked about some things that have happened and that Mitch tried hard to get it done. We talked about some rulings coming out with the courts. It was a very, very productive and united meeting with a very strong president.
Robert, that certainly sounds like a very friendly reunion, even though these two men hadn't spoken to each other for years. What do you make of the fact that they're putting on this public display of unity for the party?
Based on my conversations, Ouija, with those who are inside the room today with former President Trump, it's a calculation. They see former President Trump as a political winner, someone who can carry the party to victory, win the White House again, and they want to be on that train politically. They don't want to be left behind. They don't think there's any political capital in being in the never Trump camp or the anti-Trump camp. And so being there outside that room today, you really got the sense that they were all rallying around Trump. Now, Senator Mitt Romney, he made sure to get out before Trump came out for his statement. A few other senators, like Senator Cassidy of Louisiana, ducked out earlier, but most of them hung around, gave Trump a huge ovation as he walked out of the room. And this is the same group of senators who just a few years ago were hiding out during an attack on the Capitol. Many Trump supporters going to the Capitol that day. But that was a distant topic. As Senator Barrasso told me, it never came up.
So how much of this is self-preservation versus, believing this is what's best for the party? Or are they linked forever?
I think it's more of an acknowledgement of the political reality. When you look at the history of the Senate, so often it was dominated by party leaders who determined the path of the respective parties. You think of President Johnson when he was Senate Majority Leader, really driving Democratic policy. Now it's the base of the party, the voters who are driving the parties. It's much more of a grassroots political movement, especially inside the GOP, whereas the Democrats have a bit more tradition, at least now, with President Biden in the White House, the Biden people driving the Democratic Party, with traditional coalitions like the unions and other groups. The Republicans are so driven by their own voters and the grievances of their nominee.
Today, Trump also met with American business leaders at a roundtable, along with an advisor to President Biden. Can you talk about how important their support is for the candidate, these business leaders?
When you look at the primary results in the last few months, you always saw Nikki Haley's getting 15%, 20%, even though she's out of the race in a lot of these state Republican primaries. And so for Trump to meet with Governor Youngkin in the last few days, the governor of Virginia, who's friendly with many traditional Republicans, business leaders, comes out of the private equity world. He now meets with CEOs, part of the business roundtable here in Washington, D.C. It's Trump's overture to the Nikki Haley voter without ever having to say the words Nikki Haley. So he's trying to get that part of the Republican Party to come around. And when you're shaking hands with Mitch McConnell, when you're breaking bread with Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin, and you're meeting with the business roundtable, that's pretty much a trifecta of the traditional Republican wing. And it shows that Trump, even though he doesn't like to talk about making an overture to those people, he is.
And Trump is also trying to reach out to Latino voters. And we know that during this roundtable, the Biden team launched a brand new 7-figure ad buy targeting Latinos on corporate greed. Can you talk about whether Trump is concerned about not being able to grow this base?
Populism was a story in 2016 and 2020. Once again, a story that Democrats trying to counter Trump's populist appeal by saying with someone like FTC Chair Lina Khan and Biden's corporate policy that they're taking on the corporations, they're taking on the issue of greed. So there's a real battle for the working voter and who's going to be seen as tougher against corporate America.
All right, Robert Costa, thank you as always.
Thank you.
Capitol rioters created $3 million in damages on January 6th, while many who were court-ordered to pay portions of that back are now leaving taxpayers holding the bill. You're streaming America Decides. The January 6th rioters left nearly 150 police officers injured and parts of the Capitol ransacked. Nearly 3.5 years later, a CBS News exclusive reveals that offenders have only paid a fraction of court-ordered restitution. That review finds only around 15% of the money has been paid. Payments have been sluggish as some offenders have argued they are having difficulty coming up with the cash. Our Scott McFarland has been covering this extensively. He joins us now to break it all down with his new reporting. Scott, great to see you. Walk us through the estimated costs of the cleanup here, and why is it taking so long for those court-ordered restitutions to be paid?
Hey, Ouija, we went looking at this as Donald Trump made his first post-January 6th visit to Capitol Hill and tried to figure out how the Capitol complex has been recovering in the time since. And we found it's still taxpayers largely on the hook for all the repairs and recovery from a very damaging U.S. Capitol siege. The estimates given in the court system from the U.S. Department of Justice is roughly $3 million or so in repairs to the historic windows, doors, marble, and art, and the cleanup and the treatment of injured police officers. And there's a sense that maybe a conservative estimate at $3 million. 3.5 years later, according to a congressional source familiar with the matter, speaking to CBS News, about $437,000 in court-ordered restitution has been made so far by the January 6 defendants. That's about 15%. And to be clear, our review of the 1,400 plus cases so far, Ouija, is that defendants are being ordered to make restitution to offset all those costs, ranging from $500 in some cases to up to $2,000 in others. But the payments are coming in slow, particularly sluggishly. And there are a few reasons for that. First of all, some of them are incarcerated. They're able to make payments, but maybe choosing not to. And judges have sent some conservative increments for these defendants, some paying as little as $250 a month as they cry poverty after their January 6th arrest. Ouija, this is a process that has been slow to move all these months later.
Scott, I imagine there are deadlines, though, right, attached to when they have to pay up. And I know you report that federal judges have exercised some flexibility in the payments. Can you talk about what those options might be?
Yeah, in some cases they get a monthly installment plan, as if you were subscribing to a streaming service. You get to make a monthly payment, and sometimes it's small enough where it doesn't make much of a dent in the overall bill. But there's a more fundamental dynamic here, Ouija, and I think it's worth mentioning politically. The Department of Justice's guidance to all criminal defendants across America is that if you make your restitution payments, it's a sign of remorse, it's a sign of good faith, and it counts in your favor if you seek a pardon in the future. It's a motivation to promptly make your restitution payments. Well, this is much different, isn't it? Donald Trump has offered a blanket pardon of sorts. He's at least spoken that possibility aloud. That would make it unnecessary to show good faith, unnecessary to show remorse, unnecessary to make your restitution. That's one of the many singularly different dynamics of the U.S. Capitol prosecution.
And Scott, is this lack of money coming through impacting other areas, police departments, for example, that responded to the attack?
The bills keep accumulating. I know this seems like ancient history to some people, and some people would prefer it to be ancient history politically, but the bills continue to accrue. There are medical bills still to be paid for police officers. There's backfilling bills that local communities still need to offset. The Washington, D.C. Police Department, which helped the U.S. Capitol Police respond to the attack and repel the rioters, recently indicated it may need $500,000 more to help offset the costs it suffered while responding to the U.S. Capitol riot. You know, the pain and suffering for the victims continues, and the financial pain for those who had to fix, clean up, and care for the victims continues too.
And I know, Scott, you will continue your reporting on this. Thank you so much for those exclusive details. Well, if you plan to visit Washington, D.C. this summer, the Library of Congress has a new exhibit that for the first time is taking the wraps off its vast historical archives. It features more than 120 historical items on display, Lincoln's handwritten draft of the Gettysburg Address, a lyric sheet from The Sound of Music, and James Madison's crystal flute, the same one that Lizzo played at her DC concert just 2 years ago. The exhibit is called Collecting Memories and is open to the public through December 2025. That does it for us today. We'll be back with another edition of America Decides Monday at 5 p.m. Eastern. The Daily Report with John Dickerson starts right now.